Take a moment, sit back, breathe. There's a quiet pattern I want us to look at together. There is a detail you stopped sharing with someone you still talk to every week. Not a secret. Something small, a song you found, a thought on the commute, the thing the barista said that made you laugh. At some point, you just stopped volunteering it. You kept showing up to the relationship, but you quietly reduced your offering. And some part of you was paying close attention to whether they noticed the difference. Maybe the test ran for a week. Maybe it's been running for 3 years. Maybe you didn't even name it as a test when it started. It felt more like tiredness or like giving them room. But underneath the tiredness, there was a question that never got asked out loud. If I stop feeding this, will you come looking? You tell yourself it's space. You tell yourself you're protecting your energy. Sometimes those things are true. But sometimes the silence is something more deliberate than that. And you know the difference, even if you haven't said so to anyone. Act 2. Reframe thesis. Here's a kinder, more biological read on what's actually happening. You aren't being passive-aggressive. You aren't emotionally immature. What you're doing is running an audit, and the audit has a very specific purpose. You're trying to measure the structural load-bearing capacity of a relationship without putting your full weight on it. Think of it like an engineer testing a bridge by reducing the load, not by collapsing it. You withdraw a small offering, step back, and watch what the bridge does. Does it hold? Does anyone walk across to find you? The withdrawal isn't the problem. It's the instrument. The bridge testing metaphor holds here because you're not trying to destroy the connection. You're trying to determine, without risking full exposure, whether it's safe to trust. This is a protection. It worked once, in an earlier chapter of your life, when the cost of fully showing up was sometimes not being met, and the silence was a way to manage that risk before it landed. The question worth sitting with is only whether you still need the same instrument now in this relationship, at this point in your life. Act 3. The science attachment researchers, drawing on John Bowlby's foundational work, describe something called a proximity-seeking threshold, the level of perceived safety required before a person will actively signal need to someone else. When that threshold is high, people often develop indirect strategies to test whether safety exists before committing to full disclosure. Withholding small things and monitoring the response is one of those strategies. It's low cost in the moment if no one notices you haven't lost anything visible. But the cost is carried elsewhere, in a kind of background cognitive hum. The unshared thought, the unexpressed observation, the withheld small piece of your day. Each one stays open in working memory as an unresolved loop. Psychologist Gordon Pennebaker, 1986, found something quietly significant. Naming an unresolved feeling in even a single sentence reduces its background cognitive load measurably more than simply thinking about it. The act of expression closes a loop. The silent mind keeps reopening, which means the silence you're keeping isn't just an interpersonal strategy, it's also a tax on your own attention. Every small thing you decided not to share with someone is still, in some low-level sense, running. The bridge test has a structural cost, and you're the one carrying it. The default mode network, the brain's resting state system, is what generates that background hum. It's the network active when you're not focused on a task. The one that replays conversations, re-examines interactions, quietly asks whether that person noticed your silence. The Zeigarnik effect, the tendency for incomplete tasks to occupy more mental space than completed ones, applies here. An unspoken thing is technically unfinished. Your nervous system keeps a tab open for it. What you intended as a quiet test of the relationship is also, neurologically, a quiet drain on you. None of this is pathology. It's a well-designed system operating in a context it wasn't originally built for. The part of you that learned to audit love by reducing supply was responding at some earlier point to a real signal. The signal was, full disclosure isn't always safe. Sometimes people leave when you need too much. Sometimes they stop meeting you halfway and you don't find out until after you've already extended yourself. So, the nervous system built a workaround. Give less, watch more, and only expand when the response warrants it. That's not dysfunction. That's an elegant, if costly, solution to an earlier problem. Act 4. The alternative. The question isn't whether the audit is wrong, it's whether the audit is producing accurate data. Here's the issue with the bridge test. A bridge that's never tested under full load can still look structurally sound. If you've been quietly withdrawing from a relationship for months or years, you don't actually know how that person responds to your full presence. You know how they respond to a reduced offering. You're drawing conclusions from incomplete information, and the conclusions tend toward the cautious end. This relationship can only bear so much of me, so I'll only give it this much. The bridge testing approach keeps the relationship stable at a lower load. But stable at lower load isn't the same as safe at full weight, and you can't find out which one is true without changing the test. Some specific things that change the experiment without blowing it up. First, pick the smallest possible disclosure you've been holding back with someone specific, not the deepest thing, the most recent small thing. The song, the thought, the strange moment on the commute. Share it in a single sentence, by text or in person, with no setup and no performance of thoughtfulness, just the thing itself. This isn't vulnerability as an event, it's a micro increment, a slightly increased load on the bridge. You're not collapsing the structure, you're just testing one more plank. Second, notice what you do after you send it. If you find yourself monitoring closely for the response, that's information. It tells you the audit is still running, that your nervous system is still in measurement mode. You don't need to shut that off, just name it to yourself. I'm watching for data. Naming it pulls it slightly out of automatic and into aware. Third, if you want to take a slightly longer view, Pennebaker's research suggests that even writing one private sentence about what you've been holding, what the silence was actually for, what question you were hoping the test would answer, reduces the background load. You don't need to send it to anyone. You don't need to resolve anything. Writing it is, neurologically, a partial closure. The loop gets a little quieter. The bridge testing instinct won't disappear because you understand its mechanism. But understanding the mechanism means you can choose, on any given day, whether to run the test or just walk across the bridge. Sometimes the answer is the test. Sometimes the answer is the walk. Act 5. Permission giving close. You're allowed to have needed the silence. You're allowed to have been measuring people without telling them there was a measurement happening. That was a reasonable response to something real, and it kept you from extending yourself into places that weren't going to hold you. But you're also allowed to be a little tired of carrying the open tabs, the unshared songs and undelivered observations and small, true things you swallowed because you weren't sure they'd be received. Those await, and they've been yours to carry alone. Your past silence wasn't failure. It was a signal that something in the relationship felt uncertain enough to require an audit. The audit was doing exactly what it was designed to do. The question you get to ask now is simply, is this particular relationship still in that category, or has it earned a different approach? Start with the smallest thing. One small true thing you'd normally hold back, sent or spoken without ceremony. Not because vulnerability is always the answer, but because the bridge testing approach only tells you what a bridge can bear in reduced conditions. And you've been living in reduced conditions for a while. Take a breath. Feel the ground beneath you. If this opened something, the next video keeps pulling this thread. I'll see you there. If you recognized the audit in yourself, I'm curious. What's the smallest thing you've been holding back? Tell me in the comments. I read every reply. If something landed for you, share it in the comments. There's always more to look at, and I'll see you in the next one.